anymore, and we don't have anything against the new regime, whichever he thought was the wisest and best thing to do. But in fact, he just let things crumble.
As a result, the messianic and fiercely anti-American Ayatollah Khomeini took power in Iran as Washington allowed the Shah to come to the U.S. for medical treatment. On the morning of November 4th, 1979, an Iranian mob stormed the American embassy in Tehran.
They're holding hostages, one report says as many as 100, most of them American, and are demanding that the exiled Shah of Iran, now undergoing cancer treatment at a New York hospital, be returned to stand trial.
President Carter refused, and the stalemate lasted for months.
Every single weekday night, the American people had their attention focused on the fact that there were hostages being held, and it made it impossible to allow that situation just to sit there and finally not to do anything.
On April 11th, President Carter told his National Security Council that the time had come to act. He authorized a rescue mission.
He was driven to it, surely by political considerations. There's no doubt in my mind about that. It was something he didn't want to do.
The rescue mission began on the night of April 24th.
The United States mounted a military operation into Iran last night to rescue the American hostages, but it failed. Left behind in the desert of Iran are the bodies of 8 American servicemen and many questions. And still prisoners in their own embassy are the Americans.
Secretary of Defense Harold Brown told reporters what was known in Washington.
The 8 helicopters and associated transport aircraft were en route to a remote landing site 200 miles from Tehran in the Iranian desert that was to be used for refueling.
But mechanical problems, bad weather, and the approaching dawn led to catastrophe. Trying to take off, a helicopter struck a fixed-wing plane.
It was complete darkness. They had night vision devices, but it was unfortunate on the liftoff. It appeared that the helicopter struck the C-130, and they were both engulfed in flames.
The mission was complex and difficult, but it was the judgment of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and myself that it was operationally feasible.
It was my decision to attempt the rescue operation. It was my decision to cancel it when problems developed in the placement of our rescue team for a future rescue operation. The responsibility is fully my own.
I'm glad that it flopped when it did, because we'd have lost a hell of a lot more of them if they'd have reached the embassy gates. I feel that we're lucky to have gotten off with just 8 killed.
And I don't see how they could possibly have gotten them all out alive. It just boggles my mind to think they could have thought that.
In the presidential election year of 1980, the political fallout from the failed rescue mission was immediate. Even Democrats began wondering aloud if Jimmy Carter could be reelected.
In my judgment, the president would be doing a good thing for the people of the United States if he now promptly announced that he is not a candidate for re-election, and if he served out the remainder of his term calmly and without further impulsive action.
The failed U.S. hostage rescue effort into Iran has claimed another victim. Cyrus Vance today resigned as Secretary of State in protest over President Carter's choice of that military move.
I could not support the difficult decision taken by the President on the rescue operation in Iran. I have told the President that I continue to support fully his policies on other foreign policy issues.
President Carter failed to win re-election, but the Iranians waited till almost the very moment he left office on Ronald Reagan's inauguration day to release the hostages.
The hostages are free, and a long American ordeal is at an end. Those were the last sounds the hostages heard in Iran. Magba America, death to America.
Some 30 minutes ago, the planes bearing our prisoners left Iranian airspace and are now free of Iran.
During his campaign, President Reagan had often criticized his predecessors for sending U.S. troops to Vietnam to fight, as he put it, with one hand tied behind their backs. But it wasn't long before his own administration was involved in a military debacle, this time in Lebanon. That story when the 20th century returns. In 1982, President Ronald Reagan agreed to send American Marines to Lebanon as part of a special UN peacekeeping force to keep Lebanon's civil war from boiling over into other parts of the region. But because the Marines were there as peacekeepers, they were supposed to fire only in self-defense, and that limitation would lead to disaster.
A catastrophic terrorist explosion has killed many United States Marines in Lebanon. By official count, 76 Marines were killed and 118 have been wounded, but the number may rise higher.
The number did rise higher to 241 dead, the most Marines killed in one place on one day since the bloody fighting in Vietnam. Fact was, the bombing was a disaster waiting to happen. Almost from the time the Marines landed in Lebanon, they found themselves under attack.
The attack from leftist Muslim militiamen came just after dawn. Mortars and artillery shells fell all across the airport. At mid-morning, the first Marine was killed.
That was how the dying began. Then a second Marine died defending an exposed position at the Beirut International Airport.
Less than 3 hours later, the Marines opened up, pounding leftist Muslim artillery positions in the hills above the airport and on the edge of a poor neighborhood nearby. An American helicopter gunship took to the air, circling the Marine compound and firing into leftist positions to lend support to the men below. Another helicopter landed under fire to evacuate the dead and some of the wounded. Most of them were hit when mortar rounds fell on 2 separate Marine bunkers. They were flown to the aircraft carrier Iwo Jima, where the most seriously injured were treated.
14 Marines were wounded that day, and 36 Lebanese soldiers and civilians were killed. But the dying didn't stop.
2 more U.S. Marines were killed today in Lebanon. 3 others were wounded. Dead are 25-year-old Corporal Pedro Valle of San Juan, Puerto Rico, and 19-year-old Lance Corporal Randy Clark of Minong, Wisconsin. Their deaths brought to 4 the number of Marines killed in Lebanon in the past 8 days in fighting that the Pentagon still officially refuses to characterize as combat.
Again and again today, Marines were asking each other, if this isn't combat, what is?
That's hitting Impact Charlie Company. Impact Charlie Company.
Barrages against the Marines come in waves. In the mountains where the Christians, Druze, and Lebanese army are battling, the thunder never stops. On the rooftop observation post, all efforts are concentrated on finding the source of fire. Cobra helicopter gunships are set up to join the search for the guns and silence them if the order is given. No one here is going to convince these Marines that they are not a target, and an easy target at that.
Fires are specifically directed and are being adjusted at and over Marine positions.
It was the first time Marine officers have admitted that publicly. It was not news for the injured Marines who spent the afternoon on the operating table of the Iwo Jima. And for the dead Marines beginning their long journey home, it did not matter at all.
And the worst was yet to come.
A terrorist drove a truck full of explosives up to a 4-story building of battalion headquarters at Beirut Airport, where about 150 or 200 Marines were sleeping, and detonated the explosives.
Many of the Marines in the peacekeeping force were quartered in this one building near the airport. Its approaches loosely guarded by poorly trained Lebanese militiamen.
An officer at the scene said, "I haven't seen such carnage since Vietnam." Many wounded, many bodies still inside the wreckage of the pulverized building.
In the pandemonium that followed, Marines, some of them clad only in underwear, began to dig frantically in the rubble. Some said they heard moans or cries from Marines trapped beneath that rubble. The rescue work was made all the more difficult as ammunition that was stored inside the building exploded. And from the hills surrounding the airport, sniper fire rang out as the Marines tried to tend to their casualties.
The few U.S. Marine sentries on duty had been under strict orders not to have any bullets in their weapons.
They were regarding themselves as not being at war and behaving accordingly. And that somebody should have caught that. You have to give them the capacity to protect themselves as thoroughly as they need to be protected.
President Reagan, vacationing in Augusta, Georgia, was awakened at 2:30 that Sunday morning, and he quickly returned to Washington.
I think we should all recognize that these deeds make so evident the bestial nature of those who would assume power if they could have their way and drive us out of that area, that we must be more determined than ever that they cannot take over that vital and strategic area of the earth, or for that matter, any other part of the earth.
Rescue workers are picking carefully through the wreckage, trying to prevent a further collapse which would kill those below. Many Marine wounded are being shuttled by helicopter to operating rooms on the fleet offshore, while still more are being flown by Air Force C-130 to hospitals across the Mediterranean. Many bodies have also been flown out to the fleet, but the wounded are the priority, and the stretchers of the American peacekeepers who've given their lives in Lebanon are lining up on the tarmac. What must the folks back home be thinking? That's the question on the mind of every Marine in Lebanon today. Do they know whether I'm alive, or do they think I'm dead? It's an anxiety that plagues them even as they sift through the rubble, trying to find the broken bodies of their buddies.
A stunned America asked, how could such a debacle have happened?
Part of the answer is that the Marines rely on the inexperienced Lebanese army to check vehicles in the area around the base. Today, all kinds of vehicles were being waved right through without the slightest verification. Almost anyone could have driven right up to the Marine perimeter, just as the suicide truck did yesterday morning. After turning into the parking lot, it swerved around a Marine sentry post and crashed through the gates heading straight for the building. The truck avoided a Marine who dove in front of it. Then it drove through a blast shield.
Just 5 shots were fired as it crashed through the gates and a sandbag wall, ending up inside the building itself. Something certain to be examined, the rule that Marines must not keep their weapons loaded. One survivor says a friend on guard duty told him he never had a chance to get off a shot.
He tried to pull out a magazine because it wasn't in his weapon, because we're not allowed to have it in his weapon. Tried to pull the bolt carrier group home. And by the time he got everything loaded, the man had already exploded the weapon. And there was nothing he could do. And he says, as the man went by, he says, he always remembered that the guy would smile.
2 months later, on December 28th, the Pentagon was finally allowed to release its report on what had happened in Beirut.
Release of the findings was delayed twice by the White House, worried about public opinion. President Reagan yesterday tried to soften the report's impact by taking all blame himself and relieving the rest of the chain of command from any responsibility.
The Commission says the chain of command stretching to General Bernard Rogers in Europe was at fault for failing to adequately supervise the Marines. Even after the embassy bombing, the chain of command did not revise the rules of engagement for the Marines at the airport, rules which directed that an absolute minimum of force be used. Still, the report says, the Marine commanders on the ground must take responsibility for concentrating so many men in one building and for altering standard security procedures so that the sentries were not carrying loaded weapons.
Less than 4 months later, in February of 1984, President Reagan pulled the Marines out of Lebanon.
The men were in their bunkers last night when the word came.
We all just got happy.
They were packing up today. At least 250 Marines have been flown to the ships since yesterday.
Nobody here doubts that once the Marines go, all this is going to fall into the hands of the Muslim militiamen. And as one Marine officer put it, there's no way the Lebanese army is ever going to get them out.
The civil war there did not spread when the U.S. Marines left, although the Lebanese continued to fight among themselves until 1991, but without American Marines as targets.
The lesson I think we need to learn is that anytime you send armed forces anywhere, especially outside the United States, regard them as being at war, no matter what your mission may be. They have to act as though they are at war.
But in 1992, American political leaders embarked on yet another peace mission, a mission that inadvertently plunged the U.S. military into the thick of Somalia's violent clan warfare, another debacle in which American servicemen paid a heavy price. That story when the 20th century returns. In 1992, Americans preparing to celebrate their Thanksgiving Day were deeply disturbed by devastating pictures of starving children in far-off Somalia. Somalia had lost a long, grinding war with Ethiopia, Its president had fled. Somali clan leaders battling for power were preventing relief workers from trucking food from the port city of Mogadishu to the interior, where 3,000 people were dying of starvation every day.
Operation Restore Hope was launched in December 1992, in the closing weeks of the Bush administration, when Somali gunmen were blocking the delivery of food by international relief workers.
We had watched a series of efforts to deal with the crisis, all of which had failed.
Richard Cheney was defense secretary when the troops went to Somalia.
There was no other basic rationale for it, other than that we thought if we did intervene, that we had the capacity to open up the port, open up the roads, and to reduce the level of violence in the society sufficiently so that the humanitarian supplies could get in, food and medicine, and that then eventually we would be able to turn over the operation to the United Nations, to a traditional UN force, and withdraw U.S. combat forces. That was the theory.
And in the beginning, the theory of Operation Restore Hope seemed to work. Under heavy U.S. guard, trucks rolled from the docks of Mogadishu through the city and into the interior. Human lives were being saved. The mission of mercy was, in fact, breaking the back of the famine.
But as the operation dragged on, the mission changed. The United Nations assumed command, and what had begun as a humanitarian mission now took on political goals, rebuilding a government and capturing the fugitive warlord, Mohammed Farah Aidid.
The U.S.
Aidid is the most powerful of the clan leaders who run the country in almost feudal fashion. When Aidid's gunmen killed 24 Pakistani peacekeepers in June, the UN put a price on his head.
American troops, now involved in the search for the fugitive warlord, became targets for Aidid's gunmen. In the first week of August of 1993, there were 3 attacks on American soldiers, the worst on August 8th.
Gunfire erupted just outside Mogadishu, pinning down U.S. troops who sped to the area where 4 soldiers were killed when a landmine exploded underneath their Humvee. It was the heaviest loss suffered by U.S. troops since landing in Somalia. UN officials blamed fugitive warlord Mohammed Aidid. President Clinton, emerging from church in Washington, vowed an all-out effort to identify the attackers and punish them.
There are, regrettably, people who still have a vested interest in misery and murder and mayhem, and so our people are at risk.
The increasing number of attacks on American soldiers brought calls from congressional leaders for tougher action.
Maybe our mission has changed from a humanitarian mission to a warlike mission, and we better go back and take a look at it.
Senior administration officials have not convinced me that they have a clear mission, that they have a clear chain of command, and that they are capable of executing what they want to do.
The most serious part of this misunderstanding has to do with not comprehending that when you send troops in, you have to act as though they're at war, no matter what your intentions are.
All the mistakes that were made in Vietnam, we made again in Somalia.
Colonel David Hackworth, the veteran of the Korean and Vietnam Wars, covered Somalia as a correspondent.
We failed to understand our enemy. We failed to know where he's coming from.
So what began as a rescue mission turned into urban guerrilla warfare. The White House responded by sending even more combat troops to Somalia.
And they brought over an elite unit, probably one of the finest units in the U.S. military, which was the 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. They conducted 7 different raids. Each raid was a template for the next. Aidid's forces simply watched the Rangers on how they were deployed, learned from how they operated, and on the 7th raid, they ambushed the Americans.
A dozen U.S. soldiers are dead, scores wounded, and at least 1 is a captive tonight in the hellhole that is Somalia.
American Delta Force commandos searching for Aidid and his top officers had raided the Olympia Hotel in Mogadishu. Aidid's militiamen quickly shot down an American helicopter providing air cover, and then they blocked the Ranger Company trying to help the besieged commandos at the hotel.
We didn't have armor ready to be able to roll in to reinforce them in case they got into trouble. They were besieged, cut off, surrounded for over 12 hours.
It took American officers that long to cut through United Nations red tape and commandeer armored vehicles from the Malaysians and Pakistanis and break through to the trapped Rangers.
Men died of rather minor wounds. They bled to death because we couldn't get them out to get them proper medical attention.
There was a lot of gunfire. The Rangers were pinned down on the ground, and we were trying to do what we could to assist them with our miniguns, but we had only been over the target about 5 minutes when we got hit.
Chief Warrant Officer Michael Durant's helicopter was shot down, and he was trapped in the cockpit.
Mike Durant. I looked down and I saw my leg was broken because it was pointed off at a strange angle, so I was basically stuck there.
In a helicopter hovering above, 2 Army sergeants, Gary Gordon and Randy Shugart, saw a mob rushing to the crash site. They grabbed ropes and swung to the ground to pull Durant from the wreckage. They propped him up, gave him a weapon, and tried to hold off the approaching mob.
How long did that gun battle go?
It's hard to judge. I've estimated anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes. I exhausted all the ammunition I had in that weapon. In the meantime, one of the ground guys was hit. I heard him cry out, and he went down.
That was Sergeant Shugart. Moments later, Sergeant Gordon was also killed, and the mob rushed toward Durant.
It took a few strikes to the head, and one guy, the specific one that I recall, hit me with some type of club or a cane or something, and he's the one that broke the bones in my face and my nose. And that kind of shocked me. I remember looking right in his eyes, and he didn't hit me again. And then about half of them were just tearing the stuff off of me, my boots and my gear. It was just a crazed mob. One guy threw dirt in my mouth and in my eyes, and they wrapped a rag around my head and hoisted me up over their heads and took me out into the street, like some kind of trophy or something.
Durant was taken into custody by ID's militia and thrown in a cell. But the mob soon found another trophy, the body of an American soldier. A Canadian reporter saw them dragging the body through the streets.
You could see quite clearly that his face had been mutilated and that he had a large gash wound along one of his thighs. This crowd followed it down the street and around a corner, pausing every once in a while for people to kick at the corpse, to spit on it, and to stomp on it.
Americans at home were outraged by the television pictures of dead American soldiers being dragged through the streets.
What's going on in Somalia? Why are we still there? Why are American troops getting killed for no apparent reason?
The objective was to try to feed people who were hungry, and the people who are dragging around the bodies of Americans don't look very hungry.
Seems to me that enough Americans have died in Somalia.
In Plano, Texas today, friends and family gathered for the funeral of Sergeant James Joyce, killed when his U.S. helicopter was shot down in Mogadishu.
I saw a bright red flash. I was knocked over. The weapon was blown from my hands.
Specialist John Stebbins was lucky. Now recuperating from his wounds at Fort Benning, Georgia, his Ranger unit came under fire during last weekend's deadly attack.
Everybody in Somalia is happy that we're there, except for these people in the Deeds militia, because we're bringing peace to Mogadishu. We really are. We're fighting the Al Capone of Mogadishu.
At Fort Drum, New York, where more troops are being deployed to Somalia, a petition drive has started to bring the soldiers home. In Berlin, New Hampshire, classmates of captured U.S. Airman Michael Durant tied yellow ribbons around town. And Durant's sister and brother-in-law went ahead with plans to renew their marriage vows today with yellow ribbons, reminders of his absence.
Michael, I love you. I wish you were here. God bless and protect you.
The toll of American soldiers killed in Somalia rose by 2 today, one in a mortar attack at the airport in Mogadishu, another in Germany of wounds suffered in Sunday's firefight. That brings to 13 the number who died on Sunday in the worst of military mistakes. Soldiers sent into battle without adequate protection. In this case, tanks to come to their rescue once they were pinned down.
26-year-old James Cavaco was buried with full military honors in his hometown of Forestdale, Massachusetts.
According to his letters, it was pretty bad. We were being shelled, you were going out on raids, you were being shot at,
Barbara Cavaco is bitter over her son's death. Angered at reports the Army Rangers went into battle without the backup they needed.
The tragedy was that we have people in command that are incapable of making decisions, that aren't doing their job. That's the tragedy.
Cavaco blames Secretary of Defense Les Aspin and thinks he should resign.
He doesn't have the expertise, he doesn't have the training, and he doesn't know what he's doing over there.
Cavaco wants to remember her son as a man who loved his family, loved good music, good food, and loved the Army Rangers.
They're patriots, and everything to them is their country. And they are not expendable. These people are not expendable.
As an infantry officer, I just find it outrageous, I must say, to have 100 men in a shooting gallery for 7 hours and no capacity there to respond.
Commanders in Somalia had asked the Pentagon for tanks and armored vehicles the month before, but Secretary of Defense Les Aspin had denied their requests, believing that politically, the presence of American armor in Somalia would send the wrong message.
We did not think of it in terms of any use as a possible rescue operation as we saw it might have been used on Sunday.
Aspin admitted he had made a mistake, and now politicians who had been calling for Aidid's capture were calling for Les Aspin's head.
He should resign now, and if he doesn't resign, that the president should remove him.
Aspin, broken politically, did resign as Secretary of Defense 2 months after that deadly battle in Mogadishu. It took only 2 weeks to start bringing the troops home.
President Clinton, who rushed the Rangers to Somalia in August, called them back today, minus those who died in the mean streets of Mogadishu, and another U.S. elite force is also being called back. This represents a foreign policy flip-flop that has left the U.S. military frustrated, allies confused, and a fugitive warlord and food profiteer stronger than ever in Somalia's cutthroat clan politics.
Their withdrawal is widely believed to be at least informally connected to the release of U.S. helicopter pilot Michael Durant. The Rangers were what Aidid had to fear most.
The Delta Force, those elite commandos who fast roped down from helicopters in pursuit of Mohammed Aidid, is also being pulled out of Somalia, having failed bravely but miserably to accomplish its mission. For Delta, it was the most disastrous mission since Desert One, the failed 1980 attempt to rescue Americans held hostage in Iran.
Like Desert One, the October 3rd raid will have long-lasting consequences for American foreign policy.
One foreign policy change came almost immediately. The U.S. gave up any idea of nation building and got the rest of its troops out of Somalia in March of 1994, less than 6 months after the debacle in Mogadishu.
It was dubbed Operation Quick Draw. 1,100 Marines packed up and shipped out, leaving behind a UN force consisting now mostly of Pakistanis and Egyptians, a country far from pacified, and the memory of 44 American soldiers killed here. For the Americans, who left by sea just as they first landed 15 months ago, Somalia wasn't another Vietnam, but it wasn't a victory either.
Our civilian authority is interested in what is largely a non-military thing. It's trying to bring about some result that it wishes, but they can't do it without showing force in some way. But they don't want to use force. And so they want the force to be as unforceful as it possibly can. That, I think, is a consistent error.
A consistent error that has caused needless military casualties. In contrast, the United States' stunning show of force in the Persian Gulf War led to a major victory. Some thoughts about Desert Storm when the 20th century returns. Ironically, the debacle in Somalia, where almost everything went wrong, took place just 2 years after the stunning American victory in the Persian Gulf War. Almost as soon as Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, the American military was given a clear order: get Iraq out of Kuwait. And once the order was given, the U.S. military launched a huge buildup of forces in the area. Aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf, thousands of fighting men and machines to Saudi Arabia. Only after the military had achieved an overwhelming manpower and equipment superiority did Operation Desert Storm begin. First, a massive aerial campaign in preparation for a ground assault, and then, more than a month later, a huge ground offensive. The ground war ended in 100 hours, and 148 Americans died. Not as many as were killed in that one suicide bombing in Beirut. What made Desert Storm such a stunning success was what seemed to be an almost perfect balance between America's foreign policy objectives and its military might. I'm Mike Wallace, and this is the 20th Century.